Thank you all. I'm here to talk about Vern Goldsberry. If there ever was a person that would fit the Cowboy Hall of Fame, it would be Vernon. He was a cowboy all his life, except for a short time, and he did everything in the cowboy way. And he also worked with the times. As times progressed, so did Vernon. He worked as a young boy for Richard Moore, and Richard's in the Cowboy Hall of Fame. I worked for Richard Moore. Anybody in our country who thought he wanted to be a cowboy, if he went to work for Richard Moore and stayed there, you could at least work, because he worked every day. When he hired me, he said, "Do you like to ride?" And I said, "I sure do." And he said, "We ride every day." I worked for him one summer, and we rode every day. And Vernon had gone through that. Plus, he broke horses for Richard Moore, and Richard Moore believed a horse shouldn't be touched till he was 5 years old. He didn't care how old they were after that. And one time, Goldsberrys were the first ones to have quarter horses, I think in North Dakota, one of the first ones. They shipped their first stud, a weanling, from Illinois by Railway Express in a crate, like you'd ship a dog, and then they came into Sentinel Butte, got the horse, and took him to the ranch. Vernon was the only person that I know in my lifetime who started with nothing and made a living in the horse business. If you think about the horse business, most everybody, they made some wonderful horses. They had a lot of good ones, but something financed it. Vernon worked, and he could outwork, I think, anybody I ever saw. But he worked and bought a ranch and made it with horses. Now that's an accomplishment I'd never seen in my life. Prior to that, there were some, but during my life, nobody that I know has ever done it. The one time that I was there, he and Harris, his brother Harris, also in the Hall of Fame, they broke 5 head of horses for Richard Moore. And I went down there a couple of days after we took him down, and there Vernon was riding one in the corral, and Harris stood outside with a .270 rifle. And I said, "What's the rifle for?" And he said, "Well, in case Vernon gets thrown off and hung up, we got to shoot the horse." And he said the youngest horse they have of those 5, the youngest one was 8 years old. And Vernon rode him and broke him. Then later on, he got some of the best studs in the country. He was a true cowboy, and he was honest. And if you talk to anybody that knows or knew Vern Goldsberry, we could talk all day about Vern Goldsberry stories. And some people I've talked to last year said, well, he was kind of coarse and crude, and he was loud, but that's the way he was. But he was honest, and he was everything that a cowboy should be. One story I want to tell you about, there was a bachelor lived, after he bought his first ranch, there was a bachelor lived next to him, Chris Hansen, and Chris had been a rancher all his life, a bachelor in a tar paper shack. And Vernon in later years helped him, and when Chris died, they tried to find his heirs, and they've had a hard time. They finally found a couple fellows in Minnesota that were distant relatives. And Vernon told me this, and then he'd laugh about it if he told you something. And he said, yeah, I had him come out here, and I wanted him to look at the ranch because I was he was going to buy it from Chris. And so he took the 2 young fellows down to the ranch and said, if there's anything you want here, well, we'll throw it in the pickup. They come into Sydney, and he said, we'll take it back to the ranch. And they looked in there and kind of discussed, and they said, there's nothing here we want. And Vernon said, well, you better take that trunk over there in the corner. And they said, no, we don't want it. You just take it. So Vernon, when he took him back to Sydney, he put that trunk in the back of his pickup. And when he got to Sydney, he said, here, you boys, take this tonight, and while you're sitting around, just go through it. Whatever you don't want, we'll throw away. So he said the next morning, Vernon was laughing, he said the next morning, they came out tickled to death, their eyes big as saucers, and said to him, you know what we did? We went through that trunk. Oh, yeah, he said, is that right? And they said, you know the first thing we found? An envelope with $10,000 in it. And Vernon laughed about that. Now, how many guys would have left that envelope for $10,000 when nobody in their life would have known that it was there, except Vernon? He could have taken and stuck it in his pocket. But he was that kind of guy. He also told quite a few stories about he was in World War II in the Army. He worked in the Army training mules, And then he was in the Army in Sicily and worked all the way up through into Germany in the war. And he said that they had to live off the land. They didn't get supplies from the Army. And they had to get food and everything as they went along. When they fed the mules, they had to guard them because the people would come in and steal the grain because they were so hungry. And then he said when they got to Germany, there was a game preserve, and he said it had been undisturbed. And he said, we were practically raised on venison. And another cowboy there with him, Raymond Gatewood, also, old ranchers, maybe you still do, shoot deer whenever they get hungry. So anyway, he went to company commander and said, we're kind of from out in North Dakota Badlands, we're hungry for some venison. Could we go shoot us a deer? And the company commander said, yeah, if you can get enough for the whole company. Well, that's about 200 men. He said, we went out and shot 14 deer. We had a good venison time. And you could tell stories about him all the time, but he was honest, he was a good cowboy, and probably make as good an inductee as you could find. Thank you.